Hello and welcome to another episode of Magicians Only. Are you a magician? It's alright if you're not. You are so welcome. You might find something really interesting in today's episode. If you are a fan of TV shows and murder mysteries, you're going to find this episode really, really interesting because it's where the two worlds meet, magic and acting. This episode, as always, is sponsored by the incredible Magic on the Go. Magic on the Go, where we are rescuing the magic secrets and keeping them in this digital vault, in this online vault that you can carry around in your pocket so you can learn magic wherever you are. Almost 1,000 videos at your fingertips. If you imagine, I've been watching too much Instagram, but if you imagine, or maybe I've been drinking too much brandy, but if you imagine that, you know, like on Instagram when they have all those animal rescue videos where somehow, somehow a fox got caught in a fence and it was tied to a fence or something and just happened to be somebody with a camera to catch it. Well, imagine that I'm the person who's rescuing the animals, but instead of animals, they're magic secrets and they're magic tricks and they're things that we're going to lose if we don't rescue them and keep them in a nice, safe, warm place where we can feed them, they can grow, become part of the family, and eventually leave. That's what Magic on the Go is. It's a place where we grow, we develop, we finesse, we curate, we love our magic, and it grows with us and becomes part of us. So, yeah. Anyway. It's the greatest online global magic school in the world, and it sponsors this program, so I'm very grateful for it. Let's get on with today's episode. Well, this is going to be an eye-opening episode because, oh my gosh, do I have notes for this one? This is Mr. Valentine meets Mr. Monk. If you are a fan of Monk, you will know that they did a magic episode where the magician was the bad guy. I'm not giving any, there's no spoilers here, by the way, just because you pretty much find out he's the killer, he's the bad guy in the very opening scene as the Great Torini. Anyway, there's this amazing, wonderful episode of Mr. Monk meets the magician. And today what I want to talk about is how it came about, what things that happened during the filming, and some other strange coincidences along the way. So, welcome to Mr. Valentine meets Mr. Monk. This episode came about because of two magicians, actually. Steve Valentine, yours truly, and the wonderful Andrew Goldenhirsch, who is in the episode. First of all, I just want to say, if you've never seen this episode of Monk, currently the entire series is on Netflix. I highly recommend you watch the entire series. It really is a wonderful detective show, and it was on USA Network for years. It was a massive hit for them. You know, you hear that Hollywood is all about who you know, and in many ways it is all about who you know, but it's also about why you know those people. I've got probably 5,000 names in my database, in my contacts, but do I really know most of those people? Nah, not really. So Monk started because the executive producer / director of the series, Randy Zisk, he and I had a mutual friend, and that's how I met Randy, and he's a lovely, lovely man, and we got on really, really well. I had just finished Crossing Jordan, and this is a time when I was considering kind of picking up a deck of cards again, but I really hadn't done magic for approximately, I would say, about 10 years. I'd quit magic. Something really bad had happened, and I decided I was never going to do another goddamn magic trick as long as I lived, and we will get to that story at some point in this podcast series, but right now, just know that we're basically coming from a place of I don't do magic anymore. I haven't picked up a deck of cards. The last thing I want to do is to play a magician on television because I'm paranoid that people think of me as a magician and not as an actor, which is nuts if you think about it, because I just did 120 episodes of Crossing Jordan, and but nevertheless, that was kind of the forefront of my mind. So then I met Randy, and we got on great, and I was at a party, and this lady came up to me and she said, "So what are you going to do now that Crossing Jordan's over?" And I didn't know. And a lot of people have been asking me this question, like, what's next, what's next, what's next? And there's nothing worse than somebody saying what's next when you don't have a what's next. And at that point, I didn't have what's next. And I was getting a bit fed up with people asking me, what's next? This lady came up to me at a party. It was a BAFTA event, British Academy of Film and Television Arts. And she came up to me and she said, what's next? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe I feel like I might want to produce something, you know? And she said, well, I just finished reading a book called The Gourmet Detective. She said, and it's lovely. It's a murder mystery. And I think you'd be great as the lead character. You should see if the rights are available. And then she disappeared into the crowd and I never saw her again. I've no idea who she was to this day. I remember getting home that night and getting online and seeing, finding out who the author was, Peter King. I was able to find his agent online. I got a couple of the books. I read them. They were good. I love the title, The Gourmet Detective, about a food expert who solves crimes. Sounds very USA Network. Reached out to the agent and made a deal. I'd never done anything like this before in my life, mind you, but I had a conversation with Peter's agent, who was lovely. And he said, yes, I'd love to get this done for Peter, because Peter was quite old at the time, the author of the books. And so we made a deal for all the books. Now, I knew in the back of my mind that the perfect place for this series would be USA Network. And I knew in the back of my mind that Monk was coming to an end. And I knew Randy Zisk, who was the executive producer, director of Monk. So all of these things are kind of churning in my head. I get the rights to the books. And a strange aside on this one, by the way, another strange coincidence, was my lawyer calls me up and he says, listen, we've got almost all of the books for a really nice price. They've been very kind, and except the first one, the first book, which was titled Gourmet Detective. And I was very upset about that because that was the title I really wanted. And so he said, well, it was published by a different publisher in England by the name of Martin Breese, and he wants a lot of money for it. And I was like, Martin Breese? I know Martin Breese. What are the odds? Martin Breese was a magic dealer and book publisher in England, and when I was a kid, I used to go to his magic studio in London and buy a bunch of tricks. He actually published some of my favorite books. And I bought like the Paul Harris Vanishing Deck from him and the Mullica wallet when it first came out. And so I had not a history with him. He wouldn't know me from Adam, but I knew exactly who he was. So they arranged a phone call, and I got on the phone with Martin. And I just kind of told them, I said, look, I'm a nobody. I just finished a television series. It's not like I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on book rights. But if you can give us the rights to the books, if we sell it, then we'll make a deal where you make money then. And he agreed. So it was a very strange thing. So I'm excited. I've got the Gourmet Detective rights. And I just decide I'm going to ask Randy if he wants to be part of it. So I write a basic treatment. I have this idea of turning it into a television series. So I write the basic treatment, and I don't have Randy's number. And so I did the most Hollywood thing I could think of, which was I called Paramount Studios, right? I mean, the balls. I fucking call Paramount Studios. I get through to what I guess you would call the switchboard, right? Hello, Paramount Studios. Where can I direct your call? And I said, I'm calling Randy Zisk at Randy Zisk's office in Monk. I said he's expecting my call, which he wasn't. And she goes, all right, I'll put you through. So next thing I know, the phone rings. Randy happened to be in his office. He picked it up, and I was like, Randy, it's Valentine. How are you? He's like, I'm good, Steve. What's up? What can I do for you? We're in the middle of a shoot. I said, listen, I don't want you to think this is inappropriate, but I thought of you the second I read this. I have the rights to these books called The Gourmet Detective, and I think you'd be amazing to write and direct it, and maybe we could write it together, and, can we talk about it? And he said, well, look, he said, and he did, he was lovely, he was really nice, and he kind of did what you call the Hollywood shine-off, which was, look, I'm really busy, we've got a lot of projects, as Monk is going to come to an end of this season, or so we've got a lot of projects lined up. He said, I don't know if I'll have time, but I'll take a look at it. So I send it over to him, and we have a meeting, and he immediately says, I love this idea. This is great. So he gets on board. And then because I'd never actually written anything for television except one episode of Crossing Jordan, see if you can guess which one that was, we also added another writer to the team, which was Andy Breckman's brother. Andy created Monk. So we added Andy's brother, and we had this great kind of triumvirate, this threesome, for a Hollywood term, and we started to create the Gourmet Detective. Meanwhile, this episode of Mr. Monk and the Magician comes up by fluke. What had happened was the creator of Monk had been at a party and seen Andrew Golden Hirsch perform. Now, if you know Andrew Golden Hirsch's work, he's such an amazing magician and lovely guy, super, super talented, very, very skillful, incredibly minimalistic. Love his work. And this is coming from a guy who takes like suitcases of equipment to every show. You know, Andrew shows up and it's all in his pockets, except for the chickens. But that's another story. Wait, was that part of the show or was that just at a party? Anyway, no, it's part of his show. But Andrew had done a trick called, I believe, shadow coins. And Andy Breckman had seen this and it just inspired. He just saw the opening scene of an episode and immediately he knew what it would be, Mr. Monk and the Magician, and he knew what he was going to do. Now, shadow coins, I believe the routine that Andrew was doing was created by Chris Korn, which is good to note here. Chris, again, an amazing close-up guy. So Andy Breckman writes this episode, and then he's talking to Randy Zisk about it, and Randy's like, well, I know Steve Valentine, and he's a great magician, but I don't know if he'd do it, because he hasn't done magic in a while. But he is an actor as well, and he's available. I was really available because, what's next? Nothing. I go and I have a meeting. I don't think... In hindsight, I couldn't remember, but I don't think I auditioned for it. I think it was just basically a conversation. Anyway, I go, we talk about it, I get the part, and I agree to do it. And in my heart, I'm like, I don't know whether I should be doing any magic on television. And you'll understand when we get to the whole, why I quit magic thing at another day, why I'm like that. But I just was really unclear. Anyway, I can tell you right now, I'm so happy that I did it because it was just such a wonderful experience. But so I get the script, it's great. And the first thing I think about is John Calvert, because I love John Calvert's autobiography. John Calvert was this amazing traveling illusionist who was an adventurer and a hunter. And at one point in his life, he was a silver screen movie star, like back in the day. This guy, I saw John Calvert at 100 years old play a show at the Magic Castle where he had a live rifle on stage. He would not get away with that today. He had a live freaking rifle on stage, John Calvert. He was amazing. You can look him up on YouTube. There's whole shows. But John had this incredible life. I think he crashed his plane like 3 times. I mean, he was amazing. But there's rumors that John smuggled things in the secret compartments of his equipment as he was traveling the world. This is alleged. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard rumors for years. So as soon as I read this episode of Mr. Monk and the Magician, I'm like, oh, this is just like John Calvert. This is so fun. I love this. And another aside, John Calvert, his biography is something that I think would make an amazing movie. I have been unable to get the rights to that one for a number of reasons, but I still think it would be great. Anyway, I say yes. And so begins the journey of Mr. Monk meets the Magician. Now, Andrew Golden Hirsch inspired this whole storyline, so it was only right that he be part of the project. When they asked me if I needed a magic consultant, my whole theory when I read the script was we could actually put in a lot of magic into this episode. Probably my goal, in fact, was to put more magic in this episode than has ever been in any crime magician episode ever. So that was my number one goal, whether it be a Columbo or whatever. So I suggested that we have Tony Clark, because Tony is an amazing, he's amazing when it comes to being, he's an amazing magician, but if you know Tony, he's a really smart guy. He builds props. Having him as a magic consultant, fantastic. And then I also suggested Andrew Golden Hirsch because I think the two of them, and there was another reason why I suggested Andrew, and that was shadow coins. Andrew got permission to do it, but the whole episode starts with my character performing the shadow coins, which is this beautiful piece. Look, I'm telling you right now, if you don't know magic and you watch the beginning of that episode, you'll swear it's a camera trick. It's not. It's sleight of hand, and it's gorgeous. And I don't do that trick. And one of the things that can happen when you're a magician is everybody assumes that you can do any and every trick. I once got hired by this guy who's like, the one thing I want you to do is when you're walking around doing close-up magic is I want you to link 3 finger rings together because I saw someone do that and I think it's amazing. And I said to him, I don't do that trick. Plus, you can't really do it in walk around. It kind of is more of a stage piece. He didn't really listen to me. I remember I put all these other ring tricks together. When I went to the gig, I think he was so upset. He almost fired me because I didn't do it. So I knew better than to say, listen, I can learn it in a couple of days, because I knew I wouldn't be able to. So the goal was, so I suggested that we bring Andrew in and we use his hands at the very beginning of the episode. So there you go. That's why the fingers of my hands suddenly shrink and then suddenly get longer when we go to the full body shot. It's because it's Andrew's hands at the very beginning and I'm literally just doing the monologue off camera. It's a beautiful piece of magic. I have no problem in admitting that's not me. It's a great start to the episode, and I think it was, fitting, really. We also decided that Andrew could be actually part of the show. He plays one of the backstage staff. He's got the long curly hair. I think he's even got a line or two. There is one very weird moment I noticed when I rewatched the episode, and that was when the monk has walked into the backstage area and found Kevin Dorfman dead. Spoiler alert, I murdered him. And so they're standing around the body, the three cops, or maybe four cops, and somebody's taking pictures or whatever. And Andrew's character just kind of walks into the background for some reason, as if he's just having a look and taking notes. And I don't know, maybe there was a line they gave him that got cut out, or there was a reason why he was there, but it's the weirdest moment. Maybe it was a red herring, I don't know, but it's very strange because Andrew comes in and he kind of looks around and he makes a note on a piece of paper. He's supposed to be backstage staff. There's a dead body on the floor and it doesn't seem to faze him. It's very funny. Anyway, just thought I'd point that out. One of the greatest things that happened with this episode was they got permission to shoot it at the Magic Castle. And the Magic Castle has been such an important part of my life from the moment I arrived in LA. As an actor, as a magician, it's really integral. So the idea that I was going to be filming at the Magic Castle was in some strange way a bizarre fusion of acting and magic. It was so cool. I'd also never appeared on the stage, the Palace of Mystery. I'd only ever worked the close-up room back in my magician only days. It was really wild. I had a bet. There was an interesting moment when we filmed most of the Magic Castle stuff was filmed there, but there was a couple of moments that were filmed in an area, I believe at the studio, at Paramount Studios, where they replicated one of the backstage areas, and they had this weird, strange wallpaper. And I was like, that doesn't match anywhere at the castle. And I was told off by the set designer because he was like, yeah, no, this is exactly the kind of wallpaper they have at the castle. And I was like, I've been going there for years, mate. I haven't seen this wallpaper anywhere. So we made $100 bet. And I lost it. So he of course I did. He's a professional. He knows what he's doing. I don't remember if I paid him. But it was great to get on the stage and to be Torini. Now, you'll notice there are all these posters throughout the episodes of the Great Torini in different countries. When you go to his apartment, there's all these posters. The good news is they let me keep those. So I have a ton of them. They're in a box in the garage. I've got one on the wall because I just can't have my face all over the house. It's as Hollywood as I am. I'm not that Hollywood. So I want to take you through the episode. I rewatched it today and it just brought back so many amazing memories. I wrote a whole ton of stuff. I sat down with Tony and with Andrew and we figured out what the magic would be in the episode. And I can tell you there was probably 3 times the magic that we figured out that actually ended up in the episode. We filmed most of it, but a lot of it was cut for time. Still, even then, I think we've got more magic tricks in that one episode. Mainly because I was able to pull most of them off, except for the shadow coins. So I'm really proud of that. If we look at the opening scene, which happens, I think it's supposed to be in like Hong Kong or somewhere like that. My character Torini is having a tete-a-tete with a drug dealer, and he's doing all these magic tricks. I remember I'm doing like the shadow coins apparently, and then I'm making the guy's watch disappear, which just pisses them off, and he pulls a gun on me. Meanwhile, of course, being the arrogant magician that I am, where they get that character from, I keep on doing magic to these gangster thugs who do not react to the magic. I think it's hilarious. I'm doing all this great stuff. At one point, I produce a baby chick from nowhere, and all they want is their watch back. Talk about a tough crowd. Still, the baby chick was interesting because I had this technique for making him vanish, and he didn't want to stay vanished. And we must have done 5 takes where I would make the baby chick vanish. It was so cute. And it would reappear back on the table. And it was just, we couldn't get the baby chick to stay vanished. I don't know. He was a camera whore. What can I tell you? Chickens. Working with animals is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. I tried it once. In this episode, I'd never worked with animals before, other than a rabbit that I had as a pet when I was a kid. But working with a chicken and working with doves in this episode was a brand new experience for me. And I don't know, I don't feel so comfortable with that. I did want to, at one point when I was doing my magic show, one-man show, Life and Other Deceptions, I really wanted to bring back the rabbit from the hat trick, and I did some research on it, by the way. And in Los Angeles, if I wanted to use an animal, if I wanted to use even if it was my pet rabbit, who loves me like your pet dog, if I wanted to use the rabbit in this show, there were all these kind of hoops I would have to jump through. You'll be glad to know. But they were kind of crazy because there was a whole clause, because there were all of these rules, these government rules about having an animal. So it had to have a special place where it lived. It had to have an escape route. I had to have a written escape route in case of fire, what my plan was, what the feeding program was, what the work schedule was. I mean, it was insane if I wanted to use a rabbit in the show. And at any point, a government official could come and just check in on the rabbit and make sure it was being treated well. Unless I was going to eat the rabbit, in which case it was fine. So if I'm going to eat the rabbit, there are no checks. But if I'm going to potentially make it a star, they're going to make my life difficult. So Hollywood. Here's another crazy coincidence I noticed as the episode started. And that is that the theme song, I think it's called It's Crazy Out There, was written and performed by Randy Newman. When I got to LA in 1989, I started doing magic at celebrity parties, which was a whole new experience for me, these big houses. And Randy Newman was the first ever celebrity that I ever did magic for at his party. I remember showing up at the house. It was a gorgeous place, and there was a giant white piano there. And I'd heard somebody talk about how if you can tell a lot when you go to someone's home, you can tell a lot about them. So I look at the piano, I'm like, oh, this is somebody who's very musical. I didn't know who the client was. I was just sent there by an agent. And I look around the books on the shelf, and I'm seeing all of these books on music and comedy. And then I saw this one novel. It was called The Three Amigos, which at the time was one of my favorite movies. And I was like, Three Amigos, music, Randy Newman wrote the music. Oh my God. And it was Randy. And I worked for him for years, even when he was doing a television series called Cop Rock with Stephen Bochco, which was a massive flop. In fact, we went to a party. I did magic at a party at Randy's house when the show got cancelled. They were roasting each other mercilessly. It was hilarious. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of a very interesting magic acting coincidence, because I remember when I went there, all I wanted to do was to break in as an actor. And now here I am doing a show with the theme song written by Randy. I thought it was pretty cool. So we film all this stuff at the beginning. There's no camera tricks. There is a moment, actually, where a deck of cards disappears. It looks like a camera trick, but I can tell you that the angle of the camera, I'm doing a sleight of hand deck vanish, and it looks unreal. And it's one of my proudest moments that deck of cards disappears that quickly. Boom, boom, it's gone. Abracadabra. It's abracadorfman, motherfucker. I really love that deck vanish. For those who are interested, the technique was a Gary Willett technique from Threshold, which was a trick that he put out years ago. And it's just one of my favorite vanishing decks. There's a very interesting lesson that I learned in doing this episode, because there was a bit more exposure in the script, a bit more magic exposure. And, magicians get very uptight about exposing the secrets of magic. But one of the things that was exposed was integral to the plot and the mystery and the detection part of the show. And I remember Andrew and I and Tony, we all kind of had a word with the powers that be. And there was this kind of, our attitude was more like, we kind of owe it to the magic audience not to do this. And their response was, well, we owe it to our audience to do the best possible show. And it made me think, yeah, I get it. It's not like now on Instagram where tricks are exposed for the sake of exposing them. In many ways, they actually created the method of the floating cane with painted thread. Nobody paints thread as a clue, so the flaked paint could end up on Dorfman's collar as a clue. And I thought that was really lovely. And I understood that sometimes in show business, kind of the bigger goal, which is to create the better project, the better product, and to be absolutely authentic with your audience is more important. But we did get them to take out a few things that were probably going to piss off a lot of people. So I call that a win-win. By the way, I do like the bit where he vanishes, when Dorfman vanishes the rabbit, and then it's running around inside his pants. That was genius. I think that originally they were going to show how the rabbit vanished from the box, and then we came up with the bit in the pants. I didn't come up with it. I think that may have been Andy's idea. Andy Bregman, the genius creator of Monk. One of my favorite lines in the whole episode is when Dorfman does his horrible magic act at the Magic Castle, and Tony Shalhoub's character, Mr. Monk, is just trying to keep it together and trying not to freak out. And I think he says at one point, there's like 3 dead doves on the stage. I know, I shouldn't laugh at that, but it was a joke. It was hilarious. When we shot the scene in the Magician's Loft, here's a little bit of trivia. That wasn't a stage set. That was downtown Los Angeles. It was this gorgeous open plan loft that was above a factory, like that was making, the people downstairs were making clothes the whole time, and we were upstairs filming. So I don't know who lived there, but it was I wanted to live there after that. I thought it was just the most amazing apartment. They got all those Torini posters everywhere. It was really gorgeous. We decided in that scene to try and put in as much magic as possible as Torini is walking around and having this conversation with Monk, and they're playing kind of with each other because they each kind of know the other one knows. Torini's arrogant. He doesn't think he's ever going to get caught. And Monk is so upset that his friend Dorfman is dead that he's going to confront him. And so we had to come up with all of this kind of magic to put all over the place to happen, because a magician of this caliber, Torini's supposed to be one of the best in the world. His house would probably be tricked out with all kinds of stuff to impress people and girls when he brought them home. Very much like, there's an amazing book out right now called Boomski, which Margaret Steele wrote, and it's about the assistants who worked for the great Alexander Herman back at the turn of the century. And Alexander Herman's house, he lived large, he made a lot of money, and he would make $20,000 in a week at the turn of the century. So think about that. But Herman's house was tricked out with all kinds of gadgets. And so we were like, well, maybe this guy's house is too. So you'll notice there are bits where coins appear and disappear, where Torini is making coffee and he makes the sugar disappear and pours it back into the cup. The cup levitates. I don't know if that actually made it in, but we had a moment where the cup was levitating as we were pouring coffee into it. There's also a torn and restored newspaper as he's picking up bits of newspaper like he's cleaning up, and suddenly, boom, it's restored. There is a very strange kind of non sequitur that happens, which you'll notice, and I'll tell you why. During that scene, there's a moment where I suddenly, after the newspaper, I'm wiping my arm with a napkin, blood on my arm. It's like, why has he got blood on his arm? Reason being, we had this whole moment where I had a knife and I was cutting into my arm, probably talking about like causing harm or something. And I think it was a little too graphic and realistic for the USA audience, so they took it out. There is a levitation on a stool in that scene, which is one of the hardest things I've ever done. You need ridiculous abs to stop yourself from falling onto the ground during that illusion. That is not an easy trick to do. I will say, Tony Shalhoub, who just the loveliest guy, I mean, so welcoming and professional, to the point where, he really hated my character in the episode, and he because he really wanted to catch me. And I kind of felt a little bit hurt because the hatred that he was feeling for the character during the scenes, I actually kind of felt. And I'm like, but I like Tony Shalhoub. I like Monk anyway. But he was so brave. They came up with this. They rigged this gadget so that flash paper would go off in his hand. And it was just... It's the scene where my character, where Torini writes a confession, folds it up, puts it into Monk's hand, and it bursts into flame. Really a dick move. So what they did was they kind of made this flash pot without the pot, and they taped it onto the palm of Tony's hand with like 2 naked wires that would then ignite the flash paper. And then they ran the cable, I think, up his sleeve, and so there was a special effects guy just off to the side, and they did the flash paper on his hand. Talk about brave. Oh my gosh, it was brilliant. It looked great in the episode. Here's a funny thing that happened. So the girl who played my assistant, the actress who played my assistant, Peyton List, and by the way, it's not the other Peyton List, like the really famous 20 million followers on Instagram Peyton List. This is the Peyton List who's been around for a while and has an amazing acting career. And then another actress came along and with the same name, and it's unusual that the union would allow that to happen because now, of course, there's confusion. But the other Peyton List, who's in Monk with me, was a friend of mine, and she's so lovely, and she got to play the assistant, which was awesome. So we had the best time, and there was a moment on the stage with the zigzag when Dorfman comes in and he's like, "Listen, there's a problem with the weight with your luggage." And we're in the middle of practicing a cabinet trick. And there's a moment where I close the curtain and I open it up, and my assistant, played by the great Peyton, has gone. And, we were talking about all kinds of methods. Can we get a special trap door? Can we make her run out the back of the box? All of these various methods. And in the end, we did the simplest thing. And I think this was my idea, actually. Go back and watch it if you want. But Peyton is standing in the box. I close the curtain and immediately open it because we just wanted that kind of boom, boom thing when she's gone. But you'll notice that the camera is only shooting kind of like from my waist up and from Peyton's waist up. So basically all she did was she just ducked down. Sorry to blow. I'm blowing the magic now. But she ducked down. So I close the curtain and then open it. She just ducked just low enough not to be seen by camera, and then it immediately cuts to a wide shot of the empty cabinet. But the illusion is perfect. It just looks like boom, boom, Peyton's gone. Isn't that clever? Sometimes when we do magic in film and television, the producers and directors expect you to do stuff. And you kind of have to remind them sometimes that you don't have to because we've got the power of editing. The first thing I ever filmed when I came to LA was a music video for a group called PM Dawn. And it was a song called Paper Doll. And I remember they wanted me to make a girl disappear. I was this kind of weird master of ceremonies, top hat guy speaking French for no reason. You remember music videos in the 90s. They didn't need a plot. They wanted me to make the girl disappear and cover her with a cloth. And we're at a downtown warehouse. And I'm like, guys, no, we want it in one. And finally I said, no, you can't. We've got to do it in put the cloth over her. I'll hold the top of the cloth. She'll duck out. Then I'll drop the cloth. We'll have a flash of fire and maybe just edit out the middle bit, which is what they ended up doing. But I remember them being so disappointed when I told them that magic isn't real. The scene when I'm performing on the stage is really interesting because there's a lot more magic involved in that. There was the vanishing birdcage, which was a trick I hadn't done at that point, and Tony brought it in, Tony Clark, and I was just terrified it was going to destroy me. Without talking about the method too much, the vanishing birdcage is a trick where a metal cage just disappears while you're holding it. And it's a classic, it's a legendary trick. There's many ways of doing it, most of them a little bit dangerous, and most of them require a certain sense of faith, shall we say. This is a trick, by the way, that killed a magician called Arnold the Bear because he got scratched by a broken metal bar in his cage. He got tetanus and he died. And he was famous for that trick. So, shit happens. So we ended up not doing that one. I did do the production of the bird from the fire on the walking cane, which was nerve-wracking. I think I must have done it like 4 times to make it look good, but that was the only time I have ever done dove magic, I'm happy to say. But all of that magic, all of the magic that was in that episode, I couldn't have done it without Tony Clark and Andrew Golden Hirsch, and of course, Chris Korn's Shadow Coins, just completely inspiring everything. So as I watched the episode, all of these amazing memories came back of filming it, of where my brain was at the time with not wanting to be a magician. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity, because talk about being thrown in the deep end. Not only am I doing magic again for the first time in a while, I'm also kind of filming a character, and I've got to think about the acting, little character bits like in the funeral scene, I'm smoking a pipe, right? That's my little nod to Billy McComb, who was a lovely friend, who was a great magician and a great friend, but you smoked a pipe. And so that was, that kind of, all of those things I had to think about, as well as doing the magic. It was a great time. I'm really proud of the episode. I think out of all of the TV shows where they have a magician episode, and there's so many of them out there. I think Columbo had 2. There's always going to be a magician episode. It's usually going to be in a later season. They don't usually go for it too early. But of all the episodes I've seen, I actually think ours was one of the better ones. What's another thing that's ironic about that episode is that we do the zigzag trick, Robert Harbin's famous zigzag trick. Now, in the original magic episode of Columbo, if you're a Columbo fan, they don't do the zigzag. They have a different illusion. But the reason that Bill Link and Richard Levinson wrote that episode of Columbo was because they wanted to find out how the zigzag trick worked. So they wrote it into their script, and they created their Columbo magician episode with Jack Cassidy. Well, guess what? When the illusion shows up, it's the wrong illusion. And so they never did find out. Bill Link told me that story once. I thought that was great. But here we are doing a magic episode, another crime show, and we actually do have a zigzag. So that was really fun. I loved how in the writing, how Andy showed how much Monk loved Kevin by going in that box. If you know anyone who has any form of OCD, you know how hard it is to fight it. And I think that moment is so touching when he's getting in the box and he's saying, do it for Kevin, do it for Kevin, do it for Kevin. The cast of the show is lovely. I mean, working with Ted Levine and Brooke Smith. Well, no, Brooke Smith wasn't in that episode, but Ted Levine was in that episode. Of course, Ted was famous for not just all those episodes of Monk, but he was famous for Silence of the Lambs, where he played the serial killer, and so good. There was a moment I wanted to put a joke in, like kind of doing a tossed out deck trick with a basket, and I just wanted to say, it puts the cards in the basket. It puts the cards in the basket. But the producers said that Ted wouldn't find that very funny. Strange thing is, I've now worked with Ted and Brooke Smith, who was the girl in the pit putting the dog in the basket. She's such an amazing actress. And Brooke Smith was in a couple of seasons of Crossing Jordan with us, and we kind of weren't probably going to end up together as characters if we'd come back for season 8. So it's another coincidence, right? I'm working my way through the Silence of the Lambs. I've met Anthony Hopkins. I've worked with Ted Levine and Brooke Smith. What's next? There's a wonderful history of actors who have done magic or been magicians as well, or played magicians on television. And Chester Morris was a guy back in the day who was a movie star and a magician. And a lot of magicians have tried their hands at acting. John Calvert, Fred Keating, Roy Benson, Larry Gray. So many actors out there who have also done magic and played magicians. So I feel quite honored to be part of that troupe. Oh, and of course, the great Lance Burton, who was in the second magic episode of Columbo, and he was tremendous in that. Highly recommend you watching it. And then a weird thing happened. I started playing a lot more magicians on television. I did an episode of House where I played a magician, but I'm gonna tell you that story another day, because there's some stuff that went down there. Wizards of Waverly Place, the movie, which, by the way, was nominated for an Emmy. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll talk about that movie another time. Or you can ask me some cool questions about it and I'll tell you. So with regards to Gourmet Detective, here's what happened. I love that series. And so myself, Randy Zisk, and David Breckman, who's Andy Breckman's brother, we all got together as a team and we knocked out a pitch. And the first place we went to was, of course, USA Network, because Randy had a relationship there. He'd done Monk for years. We went and pitched it to them and they loved it and they bought it. And then we spent a year writing it, rewriting it, developing it. And I thought we came up with a really cool script. I wanted the character to talk to the camera. Now, there's a lot of television series where characters are talking, breaking that fourth wall, talking to the camera. I really wanted that for this character. I wanted him to stop and talk about, if he was cooking, just to kind of stop for a moment, talk to the camera. So there was this kind of where I was taking you in on my thoughts as an investigator, but also on the spices I was using on the food I was cooking. You know what I mean? So it was a very interesting thing. Randy was lovely. I originally was thinking that I could play the gourmet detective, but when we went to pitch it, they said, we don't really know if you're right for the part. We'll have to wait and see how the script turns out, which is just their way of saying no. And immediately, I talked to Randy about it, and he was so great. And he was like, listen. He said, if they don't want you, then we'll take it somewhere else. No worries. I support you wholeheartedly, which is an amazing thing in Hollywood. That rarely happens. So we sell it to them and they say no. And Randy says, what do you want to do? And immediately I've got my producer hat on and I'm like, no, we're gonna get the best actor possible for this. And yes, of course we're going to write it and produce it and get this made. And we did a bunch of drafts, but it ended up not being made. It was one of those unfortunate things. I managed to get the rights back and I pitched it to 2 or 3 other companies. At one point we had it at NBC, and NBC attached someone very well known to play the part, which didn't really work out. And then we eventually sold it to Hallmark via Muse Production Company. We sold the idea to Hallmark, and they did a great job with it. They made it very Hallmark. It wasn't the edgy kind of cool hip show that I wanted to do at USA. But I do believe that the gourmet detective movies that have now, I think there's 5 or 6 of them that we've made, I think that they're really, really good. And if you want a fun time, I highly suggest you go watch them, because as you do, think of me and all the work it took to get that show on the air. That's Hollywood, baby. So yes, anyway, super proud of this episode. If you have any questions, we're going to do a Q&A episode soon, and I will let you guys know exactly how we're going to have the questions submitted, but I think it would be fun. And you can ask any questions really, about acting or magic or just, Hollywood in general. That's what this is all about. All I can say about this is abracadorfman, motherfucker. This has been another episode of Magicians Only. Hope you loved it. Don't forget, Magicians Only is sponsored by Magic on the Go, the greatest online magic school in the world. We're saving magic one trick at a time. See you on the inside.